If you're considering getting an annulment in the state of Nevada, there are a couple of things to be aware of. There are two types of marriages that could be annulled through an annulment proceeding. There are void marriages and there are voidable marriages. Void marriages are marriages that were illegitimate right from the start. When the two said, "I do," it was already not legitimate. And you can perhaps guess what kinds of marriages would be considered illegitimate. Marriages between two people that are too closely related by blood. We call that within the first degree, maybe the second degree of consanguinity. Consanguinity meaning nearness in blood. Okay, so that would be siblings, parent-child, first cousins. Cannot marry in the state of Nevada. Illegitimate. Second type of void marriages in Nevada are bigamous marriages. So if one or both spouses at the time they got married to each other were still married to someone else, that is a bigamous marriage, illegitimate right from the point of saying "I do." The other category of annulment marriages are voidable marriages. Voidable marriages are marriages that perhaps were illegitimate from the start, but there's a questionnaire of fact as to whether or not the marriages should be considered authentic, and it's up to the judge to decide then whether or not to void the marriage. There are three categories of voidable marriages. One is fraud. If one of the parties was induced to marry the other party based on fraud, then the judge is going to have to determine if that's true. Was fraud a factor? What kinds of things might be fraud? Maybe the ability of a spouse to actually have a biological child. And they may have induced the marriage on the idea that they were going to have a biological child together. And maybe that's not possible, and the spouse knew that and yet induced the other one to marry them. That might be a fraudulent scenario. Another one is if one of the parties was a little bit out of their mind when they got married, maybe a little insane, maybe high, drunk, or what have you. And they didn't really know what they were doing. You can imagine in Las Vegas, we have 24/7 drinking on the Strip, and we have drive-through wedding chapels. These kinds of marriages could be voidable. There was a celebrity some years ago that had her marriage annulled for those reasons in Las Vegas. Another one would be if a person under the age of 18 got married without parental consent. It could be considered voidable. Now, if that person turns 18 and lets a year go by, and at 19 decides, "Hey, I'm going to go to court and have our marriage declared void based on being married too young without parental consent," well, it'd be too late. So all these voidable marriages, one factor that the court has to consider is whether the person claiming that the marriage is voidable, whether that person ratified the marriage by staying married despite knowing the circumstances, despite knowing the fraud, despite knowing the insanity, and in the case of a minor, staying married more than a year after reaching the age of majority would be 18. Court's probably not going to grant an annulment if the party claiming the annulment ratified the marriage. If you're considering getting an annulment, you really should speak with an attorney. There could be reasons why it would not be prudent. For instance, we have something called the innocent spouse doctrine. If you're trying to void the marriage and you're the one that caused the problem, caused the invalidity of the marriage, your spouse could declare themselves the innocent spouse, and they would be entitled to certain rights as though the marriage were legitimate, including rights to property. And if you had children, there's a whole lot of factors that come into play. So you should always consult an attorney. And I have a little bit more information about annulments on my website on the page titled Annulments.